You wake up early, sometimes even before your alarm goes off. There's that brief moment where everything is quiet, and then reality kicks in. You check the time, get up, and start your routine. Get ready, go to work, sit in traffic, deal with deadlines, expectations, pressure. And through all of it, you keep telling yourself the same thing. This is part of the process. This is how people get ahead. You're not careless with money. You don't just spend on random things. You've said no to things you wanted. You've skipped nights out, delayed purchases, maybe even started saving consistently, even if it's not a huge amount. You're trying to do this the right way. But somehow, it still feels like you're not moving forward. Then in the middle of your day, you open social media, just for a second, and instantly it hits you. Someone your age just bought a new car. Another person is traveling again. Someone else is celebrating a promotion, talking about investments, or showing off a lifestyle that looks effortless. And you pause. Because now you're not just tired, you're confused. Wait, how are they doing this? From your perspective, it doesn't add up. You're working hard, you're being disciplined, you're trying to build something real, but your life doesn't look like that, not even close, and that's where the frustration starts to grow. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet and constant. A feeling that maybe you're doing something wrong, or worse, that you're falling behind in a game that everyone else seems to understand better than you. Here's the thing, that feeling isn't random. It's built over time, from what you see, what you assume, and what you believe success is supposed to look like. And if you don't break it down, it will keep making you question your progress, even when you're actually doing better than you think. My name is Demas, and I spend way too much time thinking about money. If you're someone who feels stuck financially, make sure to hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if this helps you out. Look, if you've ever had that quiet thought in the back of your mind, I should be further ahead by now, you're not alone. A lot of people are in that exact position. They're working, earning, even saving, but something still feels off, like the progress isn't matching the effort. Now you might be thinking, maybe I just need to work harder. Maybe I need to earn more. Maybe I'm just not good with money. But here's the thing. What if the problem isn't just about how much you make or how hard you work? What if the real issue is how you're measuring progress in the first place? Because most people don't realize this. But the way we define financial success is heavily influenced by what we see every day. And what we see is often misleading. We see outcomes, not processes. We see spending, not saving. We see results, but not the trade-offs behind them. So when you compare your full reality, your income, your bills, your responsibilities, to someone else's highlight reel, of course it feels like you're behind. That's not a fair comparison, and this is where things start to shift. Because once you stop asking, why am I not where they are, and start asking, what am I not seeing, you begin to realize something important. There are only a few real explanations for why it feels like everyone else is doing better than you. Either they truly are ahead, or you're comparing yourself to incomplete information, or the system you're using to judge success is fundamentally flawed. And in most cases, it's a mix of all three. Let's talk about the advice you've probably heard 100 times. Just save more money. Invest as early as possible. Avoid debt. Live below your means. On the surface, it all sounds solid, logical, responsible. The kind of advice that should work if you just stick to it long enough. Now you might be thinking, yeah, I know all this. I'm already doing most of it. Exactly. That's where the disconnect starts. Because here's the thing. If the advice is so simple and you're already following it, why does it still feel like you're not getting ahead? Here's what most people don't realize. That advice is not wrong. It's just incomplete. Take saving money, for example. People say just save more, but they rarely talk about how much is actually meaningful. Saving 5% of your income is technically saving. But is it enough to change your life? Probably not. Even saving 10% puts you ahead of average, but it still takes years before you feel any real impact. And then there's investing. Just invest in the stock market. Okay, but with what money? And how much? And for how long? Because investing $100 a month sounds good in theory, but in reality, the growth is slow in the beginning, almost invisible. And that's the part nobody emphasizes. Look, the common advice assumes consistency, but it ignores scale. It assumes time, but ignores patience. And most importantly, it assumes that small actions will feel rewarding quickly, but they don't. And that's why so many people feel like they're doing everything right and still not seeing results. Not because the strategy is broken, but because no one explained how it actually feels while it's working. Now let's talk about the part that quietly messes with your perception the most. The illusion. Because here's the thing. When you look at other people's lives, what you're actually seeing isn't wealth. It's spending. And those two things are not even close to the same. But your brain doesn't naturally separate them. So when you see someone driving a nice car, wearing expensive clothes, traveling hot choc, eating at nice places, your mind automatically translates that into one conclusion. They must be doing well financially. Now you might be thinking, well, doesn't that mean they are doing well? Not necessarily. Let's slow that down. A lot of the lifestyle you see today is not built on accumulated wealth. It's built on access to credit, financing, and monthly payments. That 40,000 car? It might look like a sign of success. But in reality, it could just be a $700, $1,000 monthly obligation. That vacation could be paid with a credit card that hasn't been paid off yet. That lifestyle, it might not be a reflection of financial strength, but financial pressure. Look, people rarely show the full picture. They don't show their debt balances, their monthly obligations, the stress behind maintaining that lifestyle. They only show the outcome. And when you constantly consume those outcomes, your brain starts building a distorted standard of what normal looks like. So now your simple, responsible life, saving money, avoiding unnecessary spending, trying to be careful, starts to feel inadequate. Even though in reality, you might be the one actually building something real. This is where it gets really interesting. Because once you understand that most visible wealth is actually just visible spending, you stop asking, why don't I have that? And start asking a much better question. What is that really costing them? All right, now let's strip away opinions, assumptions, and emotions for a second, and just look at the numbers. Because money, at the end of the day, follows math. Let's say you make a simple decision. You invest $500 every month. Not a huge amount. Not life-changing overnight. Just consistent. Now assume an average annual return of around 8%, which is roughly in line with long-term stock market performance. Here's what happens. After 1 year, you barely notice anything. After 3 years, it still feels small. Even after 5 years, you might look at it and think, that's it? Now you might be thinking, exactly, that's why it feels pointless. But this is where it gets really interesting. Because what you're experiencing in those early years is the slow phase of compounding. The part where your effort is real, but the results are invisible. If you keep going for 10 years, your total investment of $60,000 might grow to around $90,000. Now it's starting to feel more meaningful. But the real shift happens later. At 20 years, that same $500 per month becomes roughly $295,000. And here's the key insight. More than half of that growth didn't come from your contributions. It came from time. Now compare that to a different choice. Instead of investing $500 per month, you spend it. Maybe it goes toward a better car, more dining out, upgraded lifestyle, small things that feel harmless individually. After a year, it feels good. After 5 years, it becomes your new normal. After 10 years, you don't even question it anymore. But after 20 years, there's no asset, no return, no compounding. Just a pattern that quietly consumed hundreds of thousands of dollars in potential. Look, the difference between building wealth and staying stuck isn't usually about one big decision. It's about repeated small decisions that either compound for you or silently work against you. Now let's go a level deeper. Because if this were just about math, most people would already be wealthy. The numbers are not that complicated. But behavior? That's where everything falls apart. Look, your financial decisions are not purely logical. They're heavily influenced by psychology, often in ways you don't even notice. And once you understand this part, a lot of your confusion starts to make sense. Let's start with something called social comparison bias. You don't wake up and compare yourself to millions of people. You compare yourself to what you see regularly. And what you see is not random. It's curated. You're constantly exposed to people who are spending more, showing more, living more visibly, so your brain builds a false baseline of what normal looks like. And now, your life, no matter how stable or responsible, feels like it's below average. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but I know social media isn't real. Sure, logically you know that. But emotionally, it still affects you. That's the gap. Now let's talk about loss aversion. This one is subtle but powerful. The idea is simple. Losing money feels worse than gaining money feels good. So when you're deciding between investing or paying off debt, your brain focuses on eliminating loss, even if the math suggests investing might give you a higher return. So you hesitate, you overthink, you delay, not because you're bad with money, but because your brain is trying to protect you. Then there's instant gratification. Your brain is wired to prioritize rewards that happen now. So when you choose between investing for a future you can't see or spending on something you can enjoy today, your brain pushes you toward the immediate reward, even if you know it's not the best long-term move. And finally, risk perception. Here's what most people don't realize. People don't avoid risk. They avoid feeling uncomfortable. Investing feels uncertain, so it feels risky. Spending feels familiar, so it feels safe, even when the reality is the opposite. And this is why so many smart, hard-working people still feel stuck financially. Not because they don't know what to do, but because their instincts are constantly pulling them in the opposite direction. Now here's where things start to shift. Because once you step out of the noise, what people show, what society rewards, what feels good in the moment, you begin to notice something different about people who actually build real wealth. They don't just earn more. They think differently. Look, most people focus on appearances. They ask, what can I afford right now? Wealthy people ask, what will this cost me in the future? That one shift changes everything. Because instead of chasing things that look expensive, they prioritize things that produce value. Assets over appearances. Now you might be thinking, okay, but isn't that just because they already have money? Not always. In fact, many people who become wealthy start by doing the opposite of what looks impressive. They drive older cars. They live in places below their means. They delay upgrades that other people rush into. Not because they can't afford more, but because they understand timing. This is where it gets really interesting. They're not trying to win in the short term. They're playing a long-term game where early decisions have massive consequences later. While most people are optimizing for comfort today, they're optimizing for freedom tomorrow. And that leads to another key difference. They value time more than income. Instead of constantly asking, how can I make more money this month? They ask, how can I build something that continues to pay me over time? Whether that's through investments, businesses, or skills that scale. Because they understand something most people overlook. Income requires effort, but assets can work without you. And finally, they separate emotion from decision-making. When it comes to money, they don't just react, they calculate. If debt costs 18%, they eliminate it fast. If an investment returns 8% over time, they stay consistent. No drama, no overthinking, no comparison. Just decisions based on logic, not pressure. And over time, that way of thinking creates a gap. A gap between people who look successful and people who actually become financially free. So what do you actually do with all of this? Because understanding the problem is one thing, but changing your situation? That requires action. Look, you don't need a perfect plan, you need a clear direction. Let's start simple. First, stop measuring your progress based on other people's lifestyles. You don't see their full picture. You don't know their numbers, their debt, their trade-offs, so using their visible life as your benchmark will always make you feel behind, even when you're not. Instead, start measuring what actually matters. Your net worth, not your income, not your job title, not what you can afford to buy, but what you actually own, minus what you owe, because that number doesn't lie. Now you might be thinking, okay, but what about my debt? Should I focus on investing or paying it off? Here's the thing. This doesn't have to be an either-or decision. You can do both, strategically. If your debt has high interest, attack it aggressively. If it's low interest, you can balance between paying it down and investing. The goal is not perfection, it's progress. Next, automate everything. Because relying on motivation is a losing game. Some days you'll feel disciplined. Most days you won't, so remove the need to decide. Set up automatic transfers for savings, investments, bills, so your system works, even when you don't feel like it. And finally, focus on increasing your income, but do it intentionally. Don't just work longer hours, build skills. Look for leverage. Find opportunities where your effort can scale, because there's only so much you can save, but there's no real limit to how much you can earn. And this is where everything comes together. You stop reacting and start designing your financial life, step by step, decision by decision. Not to impress anyone, but to actually move forward.